Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson Booksellers is located in Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples in the homeland of the Métis Nation. And of course, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Rooster Town. We are gathered here this evening to celebrate the publication of When the Sky Comes Looking for You, Short Trips Down the Thunder Road by our good friend, Chadwick Ginther. You may applaud. This is, of course, published by Ravenstone Books, which is an imprint of Turnstone, and we'd like to extend our gratitude to them as well for ensuring that we have a reason to gather here tonight. I won't take up too much of your time. I'm just going to go over some very quick housekeeping notes before I turn things over to the man of the hour and our special guest host. So just a few quick notes about procedure here in the space. There'll be a reading and introduction from the podium right here. Then we'll move along to a conversation which will take place to my left. Following that, there'll be an opportunity for all of you folks to ask questions. So I'm going to sally Jesse Raphaelit and just wander around with the wireless microphone and point it in front of your face. That's just to ensure that everybody here can hear you, and also everybody watching at home can also hear the question as well. So there isn't just eerie silence between all of Chadwick's answers. If you are watching on YouTube, please feel free to write any questions you might have into the chat, and we'll be sure to put them to Chadwick as time permits. My only other comment about that is that following the event, and you'll have some thrilling notes about signing procedure from me afterward, we'll all just sit here for one moment while we safely transport Chadwick from this area to the signing table, which is just beside our cash desk. After that point, you'll all be able to immediately attack him. But I'll go over the exact details of the signing as soon as the event itself has come to a close. Now, we are so incredibly thrilled to be revisiting the world of Thunder Road again. The fact that we do have all these incredible short stories, including award-winning and very highly acclaimed stories, all within 2 covers, is incredibly exciting. And we're just genuinely delighted whenever we can gather in one space en masse to celebrate Chadwick. So we're so thrilled that you could all be here tonight. We have a host who's going to be talking to Chadwick about this collection and beyond. That, of course, is broadcast journalist Dan Vadeboncoeur, an instructor at Red River College Polytechnic, where he teaches radio, podcasting, and communications. Having worked for CBC and CJOB, he now instructs journalism and public relations students in the finer points of radio and broadcasting. He hosts and produces several podcasts, including Super Pulp Science, which recently featured Chadwick, and Star Wars Nerds, and is the founder of FanQuest, a Winnipeg-based fan convention. When he's not working, Dan loves Star Wars, being a father to his 3 kids, and writing about himself in the 3rd person. Please join me in welcoming Dan Vadeboncoeur.
I don't know if that joke works quite as well being spoken out loud, but that's okay. Thank you everyone for coming today. I'm very thrilled to be here. I've known Chad for a very long time, 27 years, I think. We met in a very dirty, dingy smoking lounge at the University of Manitoba, and look at us now. It's been incredible. And I'm just blown away by your talent, Chad, honestly. It baffles me that you can do this. You can create this great work. I thought it when you launched Thunder Road 10 years ago. I was here for that, and many of you were as well. It was an incredible night. And then I thought it when I actually read the book and read the other books as well. So just very, very talented writer, and I just feel honored to know you, to call you my friend. And everyone, let's please welcome Chadwick Ginther. That's
Awkward. Awkward. All right. So I was both dreading and excited for tonight. I was simultaneously worrying that nobody would show up and that everybody would show up. I haven't done a live book event since I was at CanCon in Ottawa in October 2019. So that was 3 years ago. And it has been a long 3 years, hasn't it? So thank you all, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Dan, for agreeing to host tonight. Thank you, Nellie Robinson, for giving us this venue. It means so much to me. I see so many people who have driven in from out of town. My D&D group gave up their Wednesday game for tonight. So it really is. It feels fantastic to be here with all of you. I still can't believe it's been 10 years since Thunder Road published. I wasn't sure what I wanted to say to open this event. You'd think doing the reading would be the hard part. Those words are already done. I wrote those words a long time ago. I wrote those words before this launch was even booked. I just had to pick, what part of the book I wanted to read. But what to say before I get to the reading is always the thing that flummoxes me at these events. And I was especially troubled by what to say about this book, because When the Sky Comes Looking for You has an introduction where I talk about the 10-year history of Thunder Road. And it has an afterword where I talk about the origin of each story and a little bit of behind the scenes material about writing each story. So I don't know what more you want to hear. But here's a little bit about this book that didn't make it into either the introduction or the afterword. I initially proposed a Thunder Road story collection to Ravenstone around the same time as the launch of Thunder Road. I was attending Wayne Tefts' launch of On the Fly, which was him documenting the return of the Jets to Winnipeg. Wayne was my editor for the first two Thunder Road novels. And my initial proposal was to collect 9 novellas, each one themed around one of the different 9 worlds in Norse mythology, which was pretty bold, I have to say. My book was, barely dry off the press. I had a much lighter track record of short fiction. I think I had published 2 stories at the time. I had never written a novella, but whether it was politely or not, they expressed interest. And the idea stayed in my head as I kept plotting and writing and submitting and eventually publishing Thunder Road stories over the years. And here we are 10 years later. 10 stories for 10 years. That felt about fair, even if it didn't match my initial idea for the collection. So I pitched this anniversary idea for the book to Turnstone or to Ravenstone a couple of years ago, because the wheels of publishing turned slowly. And if I wanted to have a book out for the 10th anniversary of Thunder Road, we needed to start talking about it on the 8th anniversary of Thunder Road. And I wasn't sure what response I'd received, because it'd been a while since they had initially said, yeah, short story collection, we'd be interested in that. And all of this running through my head, there's this cartoonist named Tom Gault, and he has this cartoon called Short Story. And it's a simple 3-panel strip where a writer presents a manuscript to an editor, asks if they'll publish his short stories, and the editor responds, no, the end. Fortunately, Ravenstone was still interested. I've never assembled a collection before. I had no idea really how to start shaping this. I simply took every Thunder Road story I had finished, and I stuck them in chronological order, and I sent it off for consideration. But that is not where we ended up. And that's for the best, absolutely. There was no contention in how the stories were ordered in this collection once the book was complete and everything was written. I did know how I wanted to bookend it, and the rest was just making sure there wasn't too much repetition in theme and creature and the time frame from story to story. But I did know that I needed to write some new stories to complete this book. And so I gave Ravenstone a list of the concepts that I've been wanting to develop and little outlines of my in-progress stuff. And it took a while to whittle all of those materials down to the 3 new stories that appear in When the Sky Comes Looking for You. And that was its own challenge. Completing these stories often meant holding multiple narratives in my mind at the same time. So I could be drafting one story in the morning, editing another in the evening, and plotting, something else whenever I could steal time. Some old pieces I felt were confident would find their way into this collection fell by the wayside. Some newly drafted pieces didn't make the cut. I still love them. I hope you'll see them someday. And others radically changed from my initial expectation to become, I believe, something better. And those stories are something that you'll all have a chance to read soon, and I'm really excited about that because, you know, my work is done. I wrote the thing, but story isn't complete until it is shared, right? And so I'm so excited for you all to be able to read it. Times it kind of felt like I was assembling the Avengers. You know, it was work. But as I was honing these pieces, even especially the original ones, but even previously published stories, what had been standalone adventures when they were written now needed to feel like part of a cohesive whole. They needed to become part of a book. That was never their intention originally, but so a few tweaks happened here and there, which created what is for me probably the biggest difficulty in the book. I had to look at my published writing, sometimes from almost 10 years ago, and resist the urge to change everything because I could. See, the light went out, and now I'm really regretting not wearing my giant scorpion belt buckle because it glows in the dark. But, I'm sure it's fine. So I managed not to change everything. But the final odd thing to me about writing this book was I never thought of myself as a short story writer. I always intended to be a novelist. Short stories were a thing that I wrote and a thing that I practiced and a thing that I tried to get better at, but I never considered myself a short story writer. And now I realize I've gone and published over 20 of them. Several of them are collected in this book. One of them won an award, and I guess my thoughts are line jerks, aren't they? I guess I am a short story writer. I'm going to read a little bit from No Sunshine in Hell, which is the last story in this collection. And it's one that nobody else has read or heard yet. And since it's spooky season, I thought a good bit of creepy might be fun. Surprisingly, this section also has, I think, the least amount of profanity. Sorry, folks. I'm not starting at the beginning of the story, so here's what you need to know. Erin, Eilif's daughter, is the child of Ted Callan and Tilda, the last of the Norns. Those are two of the main characters from the Thunder Road Trilogy. Erin has spent all of her life in the misty afterlife realm of Hell, and that's Hell with only one L, which they have dubbed Nornheim, and Tilda now rules. Erin is trying to learn why no new souls have come to their gates, so that the dragon Mythogger can be paid what she is owed. Along the way, Erin has encountered the trickster god Loki, who's trapped in the form of a female cat. I'm just going to grab a quick drink of water. Sorry, folks. All right. Back at her. We're here. The mist thickened, a black spot, as if Mythogger lurked unseen. The black road became a hungry maw. Something was there, old, familiar. Beyond a fence of snakes, a mockery of Nornheim or an homage to Hell, the hall undulated, moving closer to her, as if it were alive. It wasn't. Nothing here was. Tilda had chased Hell's serpents out of Niflheim, but apparently they hadn't died in the mists. The Mara had claimed them for her new realm. She'd rebuilt Hell's hall, woven from snakes and dripping with venom. The only thing lacking from the replica was a rooster on the roof. No cock to crow another world's ending here. Wordlessly, Erin and Loki strode toward the hall. Its doors were gone, if there ever had been any. The Mara would want to encourage intruders. Erin used her axe as a shield, sheltering under the blade as the serpents above the door hissed. Loki scrambled onto her back and hid in the axe's shadow. Venom fell like rain, spattering over her axe's blade, but it didn't touch them. Inside, broken dead lingered, barely any substance left to them. Beyond, stacked bones were piled like retaining walls, and impaled bodies had turned to bone. Bodies stolen from Nithhogger's barrow, or dead heroes who tried to beard the Mara in her lair. Aaron wasn't sure. Torches lined the walls. Their flickering light did little to dispel the darkness. They only accentuated it. Erin's eyes were drawn away from the darkness, as if there was something there she didn't want to see. She ground her teeth, focused, turned her head back. At the end of the hall, on a throne carved from Yggdrasil's charred roots, sat the Mara. Her dirty, cracked nails dripped blood. Matted gray hair hung past her waist, parting over a belly bloated with gobbled fears. Her body gaunt, yet unnaturally strong. Aaron knew her grip well. Feral eyes, sweat slicked and greasy. She had a corruption you could feel. Fouler than hell, but different. Fear, death. For her, they were one. The Mara glided forward, toenails barely touching the floor, and yet they were thunder. "I've missed you." She hissed in Aaron's face, drawing out the words until Aaron wanted to scream. "Such delicious fears you have." The Mara's bloody fingernails were impossibly long, longer than the hag's body was tall. She raised her hand effortlessly, and her arm stretched across the distance between them. Aaron snarled and swung her axe. The blade passed harmlessly through the Mara's arms. "You stole my life." "You got better." "Mostly. I saw too fat." Loki had crept halfway across the hall. She yowled as the Mara's claws fell upon her, piercing her shadow. She stood frozen, hair on end, a drawn-out hiss scratching past her muzzle. "You won't find your waking there. You cheated me once, Trickster. Never again." The Mara clenched her fists. Bloody talons scratched over themselves, and Loki screamed. Then, gone, except for her cries. Nowhere to be seen, swallowed by darkness. "Your nightmares have been waiting so long. Remember your time under the earth? That seeming eternity? It will be as nothing. There will be no one to give you succor. Not for one moment. Not in my prison." Aaron rushed to Loki, but the shadows were solid as a wall. She battered them anyway. It was like striking dragon scale. Hissing buried the cat's cries. "What are you doing to her?" The hag smiled, cracked teeth like shards of broken glass. "What I'll do to you." From the shadows beneath every touch, the dead came to the Mara's call. Aaron gripped her axe tightly to keep from covering her ears. She couldn't show fear. Maras fed off fear. They drank anguish. For all the brave face Aaron put on, the axe trembled. Gray-skinned dead, some men, some women, rushed her. Rune tattoos marred their bodies. Other symbols of hate, were given equal pride of place. Fouling the magic her family was meant to hold and protect. They shrieked, inchoate, screaming, a beast in pain, dying. No sound that should have ever been uttered by living mouths. Their wails cut through Aaron's brain. She was surrounded. Aaron swung her axe in wide, scything strokes to keep them at bay. Her ability to shift through the mist worked against her. There were too many of them. Even wielding her rune axe one-handed, she'd be overrun. The Mara's hall shrank around her, tightening like Nithhogger's black claws. Any she cut, their smoking wounds mended almost instantly. The axe's runes protected her from them, which they sensed. Instead of battering her arms, her torso and legs, they targeted her arms, trying to force her to drop the axe. Aaron swung it. She stumbled against one of the fallen dead, still reconstituting. Another caught her on the backswing, then another. They draped on her forearms, slowing her swings. They bit and scratched her hands. Her fingers went numb, and her axe flew from her grasp, engulfed by the serpent floor. Her screams were lost in the hissing snakes. The Mara's shadow swallowed the hall, tightened around Aaron. The Mara cackled. This was the now. Nothing existed but this moment. It was inevitable. She was a nightmare. You can't punch out a nightmare. Aaron had tried. There's smoke and stink, heart attacks and strokes, poison. They aren't there until they are. Her whole existence had been a nightmare. Erin's fear for her future, her fears from her past, shadowed the present before it could form a way out. The hag dropped her to the hissing floor with a long, bloody talon. She stepped onto Erin's chest, the weight as if a giant perched there. The pressure grew, stone upon stone piled atop her, a fist on her heart, weight beyond bearing, the weight of expectation, the world's weight, the sum of her fears, crushing her. The pain should have made her cry. She couldn't. She did. You are mine now, rasped the crone, hollow and hungry. Then she laughed. Her eyes flashed red. Again. Always mine. A strand of hair fell across Erin's eyes, the vibrant red, now a muddy gray. Vision tunneled at the edges, now collapsed. Shadows enveloped her. The darkness was everything. I had said very carefully when I was rehearsing that voice because it was destroying my throat.
All right, that's a good voice. That's like when you do the audiobook version, right? That's great. Okay, well, there we go. So welcome everybody. Thank you, Chad, for that. That was so cool. Such great gross description. You know, like that's something I love about your writing is you just get into the gross part. Where does that come from?
I watched a lot of horror movies as a kid. Probably way too young.
Did we all though? I think we all did.
Yeah, I think so. They didn't care if you could like, like if you had the $2 or whatever it cost to rent a VHS at the time, I'm sure that they were fine with it. Yeah, no, I don't know. I've always been very visual. Comic books were one of the reasons, that I taught myself to read with comics as much as any other thing. I've read comic books my entire life. So even though I'm not an artist in the visual sense, I feel like I've always had a visual sensibility, even when I'm writing. I guess I spend, 5 words or 5 pages trying to describe what my artist friends can do in one panel. But yeah, probably, like a lot of things in my life, you can blame comic books.
All right. And the title, again, is a song title.
It is a song title.
Right.
When the Sky Comes Looking for You is from a, if not from the last Motorhead album, it's from one of the most recent Motorhead albums. And that song is a banger. I love it. It's so good. Yeah, it just felt perfect. The first time I heard that song, I'm like, this is Thunder Road something. And I just kind of filed it away and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. It has been on many a mixtape when I've been working on Thunder Road writing. Yeah. So.
Well, and you talk about it, and here you have your mixes that you talk about for all the books.
Yeah.
So like just talk about the importance of music and the connection to these books.
Music is the big thing that gets me out of my own head when I'm stuck, I think. Whether it's a writing related thing or like a problem in everyday life, I go for a drive, go for a walk, listen to music. That helps me solve a lot of my problems. It was when I decided I wanted to write a book that was set in the contemporary world. I was kind of excited because I would get to like foist some of my musical tastes on my readers. And that was part of it. I love pop culture. I love, we're going to try not to make this whole thing about Star Wars.
You brought it up.
No, it's, yeah, well, actually, this is going to be it, Dan and I discussing the most recent episode of Andor.
I haven't watched it.
No spoilers. Okay. Yeah, so like I wanted to be able to reference stuff like that. Until I wrote Thunder Road, everything I've written had been sort of sword and sorcery, epic fantasy style. And this allowed me to talk about music I liked, talk about movies I liked, and I was really excited about that. And then I've made soundtracks of my own before I started writing. Like I made my own soundtrack for the Preacher comic book and like a bunch of other, like a Sandman soundtrack.
So you're talking about like listening to music while you're reading the book?
Oh, no, like I would read the book and then I would make up my own soundtrack for what I imagined would be in the movie.
Cool.
Like I don't know if it was the first one I did, but I'm a huge Roger Zelazny fan, and so I made a Nine Princes in Amber soundtrack. It's one of my favorite books, and then I made a fan soundtrack for Toronto horror writer Gemma Files for her cowboy horror weird westerns that she wrote, and just sort of was always there. And then I'm like, well, of course I'm going to make a soundtrack for my own book, and then it just sort of started slotting in, and I didn't know what I wanted to do for chapter titles, and so it just like, oh, I would put some in there as placeholders, and then that became, it sort of evolved, like it became a mood that I wanted to evoke, and then in the later books, I built the mood first, and the soundtracks became my outline. That's kind of how I outline.
So did you find the song title first or after?
I had that song title kicking around for a long time before. Yeah. And then when I decided I was going to collect the stories, I'm like, this is the one. Yeah.
Cool. How many hours spent would you say on this?
On this?
Yeah.
Incalculable. No, it's serious. Yeah. I honestly have no idea. Like, I write every morning before I go to work at my day job for at least an hour. I often write on the bus, on my way to work, in the evenings, on weekends, and I would be going back over, in some cases 5 years, how many drafts did I put in on a particular story?
And of course, these have all been published at different times and written at different times, so it's kind of all over the place, right? So, yeah. Cool. So you say you've written these for other collections, other submissions, correct?
Yeah.
A lot of these were. So talk about writing in this world. Now you've been living in it for 10 years. Does that make it easier to come up with stories?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a number of the stories in When the Sky Comes Looking for You they're not cast-offs from Thunder Road, but they're ideas that I got excited about and didn't have room to explore in the main narrative. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the second story in the collection, The Door in the Rock, inspired by my trip to Flin Flon for research. And I always kind of wondered what happened to that rock troll that Ted fought. And, he didn't have time to figure out what was going on with it. He was busy. He was fighting a fire giant. And so I'm like, well, who had to clean up his mess? Right. And so that was one of the impetuses for that story. And a number of them have sort of branched out from not necessarily a loose end from the trilogy, but either something I researched and got excited about, but it just didn't fit in those books. And it just, they just kept poking at me, and I had to make them their own story.
It's been 10 years you've been living in this world, and during those 10 years, there's been another company making stories in the same kind of genre. Like I'm talking about Marvel, the Marvels. Yes. So I try to get there another way. But so what is it like working? I mean, it's not, your world is not the same. Your Loki is completely different from the Loki of the Marvel movies. But what is it like having that out there at the same time? And does it influence how people react to this?
I think it's fantastic. It's more sort of name recognition for some of those characters, like public domain characters.
Right.
Sort of like they don't belong to me. They're these were they were a part of people's religion. There's still people who worship Thor and Odin, and maybe less so Loki. I don't know that any of Surtur practitioners actively worship Loki, but then these characters, these beings, have been around for a long time. And it was one of the things that I most wanted to do with the books, was one of the reasons why I sort of set my world in the post-Ragnarok, post-end times of Norse mythology, is that anybody who loved those myths, I wasn't taking anything away from them. Those stories happened as you read them. You can assume, like, unless I something, obviously, Loki dies and spoilers, sorry. Loki dies in the end of the Norse myth cycle, and I wanted to bring him back because he's fun to read. But I wasn't taking anything away. Those stories have happened, and here's something new. And this is again where comic books were an influence. Thor has faced the end of the world in the Mighty Thor comic numerous times. I think I've read at least 3 of them, and I enjoyed those, but I was always excited about what they were going to do after, because it would be different. It's like, once they started gearing up for Ragnarok, I'm like, well, I kind of know how this is going to go. But then I also knew they were going to have to do something afterwards, because they're not going to cancel the book, or if they do, not forever.
Right.
So that was one of the things. Like, I'm doing the thing that most excited me about, these comics and these characters when I was a kid.
That's great. So in this book, you've included a little glimpse into your writing process in the afterword, just talking a little bit about these stories. Why did you decide to share that?
In some cases, I'd done like little behind the scenes blogs as the stories were originally published, just to promote the anthologies they originally appeared in, and I thought, some people think that the writer's life is mysterious and everything, and sometimes it's not. It really isn't. Like, if you sit down and you write the words, and eventually you get to the end of the story, and so I thought just demystifying some of the process might be helpful to me. And it certainly, when I moved to Winnipeg and actually started meeting writers and seeing them more commonly in my day-to-day life, it reinforced that it was a thing that I could do.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, before they start doing that, I'm sure you felt this way, felt like you couldn't, like it was just this insurmountable thing, right? So what was it that helped you get over that initially?
Well, I worked in this very bookstore for a number of years, and that's where I started realizing that authors do come from Winnipeg, and authors do come from Manitoba. And a former coworker of mine, who was also a published author, published by Turnstone, in fact, Steve Benstead, was a huge influence, because I started talking about wanting to be a writer, which is not writing at all. I was like, I think I would like to write, and then occasionally, after a while, Steve was like, how many words have you written? And I'm like, oh, well, I've got this idea, and he's like, well, you need to write it. And so, after, he was very good natured about it. He wasn't being a jerk. But, he was excited because he wanted to talk writing with me. And so I would come into work and he'd be like, did you get any writing done over the weekend? And eventually I got tired of saying no, but I had this idea. and so I just started carving out time, and a number of local mentors were very gracious with their time. Sort of got me clued into some of the resources that were available to me, either through the Manitoba Arts Council or the Writers Guild, and the Writer in Residence program at the library. There's like a number of resources out there, and I would have killed to know about that stuff, right? When I was younger, just like jotting down ideas and never finishing stories, because it didn't seem like I think it was possible.
You're so dedicated to your just writing every morning. That's just your routine. You do it, and you write on the bus. You said
sometimes,
like longhand.
Longhand. I do a lot of longhand work as well.
Really? And so, how do you just retype it out into the computer once you get there? Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like a free edit pass. Doing the transcription. It is not efficient. Our mutual friend Jonathan Ball, who is, I feel like he strives for efficiency sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
And it is certainly not an efficient way to write, but sometimes it is the only way to get a story out.
Well, it's also the only way to write on the bus, I think. You
Yeah.
can't really type on a computer, right?
I wrote the entirety of Too Far Gone longhand on the bus
Wow.
for the first draft, because I'd messed up my arm, and I needed to type at work, and I also needed to limit my keyboarding, and so something had to give.
Mm-hmm. But you still wrote it.
Well, I had a deadline.
Okay, there you go. There you go.
I had signed a contract saying I was going to deliver a book. I had a deadline.
Nothing motivates more than a deadline.
Oh yes, I gotta have it. So yeah, I wrote that book in 100 to 500 word, sometimes 500 to 1,000 word, little chunks on the bus. And when I had 100,000 words of handwritten stuff, I called it a draft, and then I had to put it into order, which was a bit of a nightmare. But yeah, it needed to be done. And some stories just start that way. If I'm out and I see something that just sparks an idea, and I start writing a story longhand, usually I will continue through with that draft in longhand.
Do you find it easier, like talking about short stories, this is the short stories versus the novels, is it more difficult to write a short story because you have to cram more into it?
I find it more difficult in some way, like mechanically writing a novel is more difficult if you look at it on, you have to type more words, and there's more to edit, and there's more room for things to go wrong. But you can get so much wrong in such a short span of words in a short story. I do find it more difficult because I didn't start reading short stories until I started writing short stories. And so most of my initial short story attempts, if I got feedback from an editor, they would say, this reads like chapter 1 of a novel. And so it took some doing to sort of retrain my brain, because they're separate skills, they're separate art forms. I feel like I've certainly gotten better at it, but normally with a novel, I will just sit down and start writing a novel, and maybe I only have a brief idea of a character in my head.
Right.
Thunder Road, all I knew when I started writing it was there's a blue collar guy who got thrown into a world of magic. That was basically all I had. And I wrote a whole book out of that, 3 books from that idea. And short stories, I tend to quilt together. Like I tend to write from, like a lot of these stories have been published in anthologies, and most of those were themed anthologies. So a story with an air elemental theme or a horse theme or what have you. And so I would kind of go through all of my random snippets. I've got a file that's almost a novel long now, and I would pull out things that fit theme, and I would look for a story in there, and then I would quilt them together. And it's, again, hella inefficient. It takes so long. Like one of the stories in here, it was 17 drafts before I actually submitted it to an editor. Well, because that's how long it took me to shoot. That's how it's worked.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Nobody wants to be first ever.
I know a lot of your names, so I can just.
Is there a face in this cover here? Looks like a face.
No, it's, well, I mean, it's a treat. I don't
We haven't
think
had
there's a
that
face
before.
in it.
But
Yes.
yes, oh, here's Sally Jessica Raphael. That's right. I'm more of a Donahue fan.
So you mentioned that comic books were kind of a big inspiration for you growing up, and I know that that's true.
You would.
Yeah, I know from when you were short. Why did you go with kind of from Marvel Comics, more of a Hercules build than a Thor build for your actual Thunder Road mythological Thor character? Because he's not very much like the noble guy we see in the Marvel Comics or in the Marvel movies. He's an a-hole and much more like Hercules from the comics. So why'd you go that way?
Well, I mean, I do not want to chance the weather fates by saying that Thor can be a bit of a jerk, but I think as a kid, I loved Thor because, as you well remember, I was the shortest boy in my class, and until grade 10, when I don't know, over like, it felt like a month, I suddenly was the height I am now. Like I could eat an entire pizza and ask my mom to barbecue burgers, and it was just like I was remorseless. But I loved Thor as a kid because he was a giant slayer and everybody was bigger than me, and so I appreciated that. And then I don't know, I think I just started as I read more of the stories. I liked Loki, as an adult, I liked Loki and how he drives pretty much all the stories. If they're not his fault, he has to fix it. And so I thought making it more from that point of view. And I mean, keep in mind that the Thor that appears in my books has died and has been, living in hell for a seeming eternity, being tortured by his enemies. So he's not what he once was. But I still feel like he would have ended up being a bit of a braggart and showboat, and I just I think I played up the cruelty of somebody who had been wounded, I suppose, and even if he knew his fate, probably thought he would be able to dodge it. It's like, oh, I'm supposed to die when I fight that serpent, but I don't know, I've beaten everybody else. It'll work out fine. Right? Like, he had that kind of high school jock cocky attitude of, I'm sure this is going to turn out fine for me, despite seeing disaster after disaster. I think that's why.
Any other questions?
I'm going to start calling you names. Like I can do that. It's just I'll point out at you like, Brent, you look like you have a question.
So,
Geez, I'm gonna ask a question also.
I thought it was mandatory to answer.
It is.
So come up with one. So why did you choose the number of stories you did that ended up in the novel?
Partly that's what I had time to finish. But once we started realizing roughly, what we had, what we were going to keep from what I previously published, and what I would reasonably have time to write and edit, that number rolled around to 10, and it was like the idea of it being a 10th anniversary collection and having 10 stories, I thought was very big.
Go ahead.
So my question would be, you mentioned another potential book of short stories coming. Is that 10 years from now or sooner?
That will entirely depend on how many Thunder Road stories or how long it takes me to publish another batch of Thunder Road stories. I've got at least 3 that are out there circulating. Another one was just published in August in another anthology, which might be the silliest thing I have ever written. It is called The Empress of Marshmallow, and it is told from the point of view of a very obstinate Chow Chow, which is also something that I have a lot of experience with. But no, I don't know the answer to that. I have at least a dozen stories that I want to write in the Thunder Road universe. I've got roughly a quarter of a novella written, which is going to be an homage to the Hal Needham movies that I loved growing up.
Cool.
I figure if anything deserves a fantasy treatment, it's Smokey and the Bandit and Cannonball Run. So yeah, there's tons that I want to write, and I just want to keep, poking away at it until they're out there in the world. So we'll see.
Ride the bus a little more.
I ride the bus every day.
Any more novels?
I would love to get back to writing novels. I've been kind of in short story mode for the last couple of years. I was working on a grant project that spun out of my short story, Cheating the Devil in Solitaire. So it was sort of in my Magic Mennonite sequence of stories, all sort of set in a very fictionalized version of where I grew up, so that nobody gets mad at my parents. Very fictionalized. So yeah, I won a grant for that, and I had committed to writing 12 stories in 12 months, and those stories are done. 3 of them have been submitted. 1 of them has sold. I just need to, finish revising those, and then this collection started gaining steam, and so I had to write new stories for this collection. I have so many novels.
Yeah, good.
I really want to get back to those 2.
I was curious if you'd ever plan on going to the graveyard mine world again. I know there was some trouble with the publisher, but beyond, if you could find Turnstone or another friendly publisher, that you'd go back to that.
I would go back to that world, especially since I've sunk 75,000 words of time into the second book before things went sideways on that series, unfortunately. I have a third book outlined in that series. I've published a number of short stories that are set in the Graveyard Mine universe. Unfortunately, it's not a priority until I find a home for the first book again. It's rare that somebody will pick up starting with book 2 or pick up an older series. It is possible. So yeah, I hope it happens, because I would like to give that series a little bit more closure. But if in the meantime, if you love that book, all of my Midnight Man short stories are technically set in the Graveyard Mine universe and in Rhonda Parrish's anthology Earth. I write a story from the point of view of Frank, the composite man, who's a character in Graveyard Mine, and I love that story and I love that character. So there's a little bit more out there for you if you like that series, and hopefully someday I'll have a chance to get back to it.
One of the things I really love is your portrayal of the norns. So
Pardon me, I missed that.
your portrayal and how you wrote the norns. So my question is, how challenging was it, or is it for you to write from that female perspective?
I mean, it is challenging in that it is a degree of separation from myself. Like Ted is easy. Ted is easy for me to write. I grew up around a lot of blue collar voices. He's not a self-insert character, except maybe his musical taste, but he's the easiest voice I have ever written of any character, because it just, he literally arrived like a bolt of lightning for me. Writing Tilda and the Norns is more challenging, but I've never wanted to neglect that. Like from my first attempts at writing, I've tried to capture a realistic women's voice. I'm sure that you have seen all the memes going around making fun of how men write women. And she walked boobily down the stairs, right? Like all of that. Like I absolutely don't want those sorts of betrayal, or those sorts of betrayals. It is a betrayal. I don't want those sorts of portrayals. And I think I've had a number of excellent women as editors in my career, and that has certainly helped me. But I read a lot of women. I write urban fantasy, and I know maybe some of the bigger names, as is the custom with publishing, tend to be the men. But I love Patricia Briggs and Tanya Huff and Carrie Vaughn, and they are as much a reason why I want to write urban fantasy as Jim Butcher. So I think the fact that I regularly, consume and enjoy women's writing is probably the biggest factor. If you like my portrayal of women, it's because I read women.
Somewhat related, you mentioned that your D&D crew is here tonight, and I wonder if you wanted to talk about how playing Dungeons & Dragons gives you a chance to explore a character.
Oh, yeah. Winding up to talk about D&D, and let's see here. How much time have you got? I was joking about how comics are to blame for a lot of me, but D&D is as much in my DNA as comic books. D&D was my first vehicle for exploring characters who were not me and trying to act like somebody who was not me. And then as I moved from just playing in a game to like trying to run my own games. Well, then I started building worlds and you know, crafting story, and so it was a huge influence. I think it's one of the, I don't know, it gave me an idea of, you know, how to be somebody that wasn't me, and to you know, maybe grow empathy from an earlier age. I don't know. It certainly was an important part of my development. Damn near all of my closest friends over the years I have shared a game table with, right? Like it's, you know, I dedicated my third book to my high school D&D group, right? Like it's, you know, I wouldn't be here without those shared stories. So hugely important. Now a question from the Saturday Greyhawk.
Well, along those lines, I believe there was a Thunder Road RPG deal happening at some point. Is it still in development, or where we at?
Well, the game isn't done. It's not a finished deal. There's been talks. I would love to do a game. You know, I have statted out Ted Callan in almost every rule system you can imagine. So yeah, if you want to have him in your 1980s TSR Marvel Superheroes game, come talk to me. If you want to drop him into your Diceless Amber game, come talk to me. We can make this happen. I would love it. You know, spoiler alert, I wrote the third book in the series as an excuse to make a role-playing game. I ended it in such a way that I could justify having a role-playing game. That's how much you know, games are in my DNA. So I would love it.
And we do have time for one more question from the audience. Yes.
I was wondering where you got most of your research on Norse mythology from, and how demanding it was.
Well, I mean, it's something I've read my entire life, pretty much. You can initially blame Greek mythology, because when I was a kid, there was this cartoon called The Mighty Hercules, and there was an annoying centaur, and he had a ring, and yeah. And so I did what any bookish kid would do. I went to the library and I checked out books on Norse mythology, or on Greek mythology, and I found Delaire's book of Greek mythology specifically. And when I read that, and I read every other Greek myth book that was in my local library, right next to them were the Norse mythology books. So I started with Delaire's book of Norse mythology because that was, you know, I really enjoyed the Greek myth. And I just I kept reading and rereading that book to the point that the librarian asked me to stop. She's like, maybe another little boy wants to read about Norse mythology. And I just kind of kept reading the other books. So I went from that one to this one called The Story of Sigurd, which is about the Volsung saga. When we started doing some Canadian history, and I had got the first notion that you know, Vikings may have, you know, landed in Canada, you know, around year 1000. Well, then I started reading about Leif the Lucky and Eric the Red, and so I found the Greenlander sagas. And I mean, a lot of the sagas, they come from an oral story tradition, and you know, a lot of them are telling about real events, but they also throw trolls and elves and stuff in there too. So the myths were always like, once I read a lot of the sagas, most of them were background for me. I didn't only rarely explicitly wanted to reach out and directly call back to one. I think I think the Volsung saga is a lot of fun. It inspired Tolkien. You know, like Sigurd the Volsung was my first invulnerable hero. I knew about him before I was collecting Superman comics. Like it was weird that way. But like there's lots of great resources out there. U of M has an Icelandic department where they teach the language, teach the myths. There's a lot of really accessible books if you don't want to read the sagas themselves. I think it was Valhalla's Children. I might be getting the title wrong, but it's there's lots of great books out there. There was a recent translation of the Poetic Edda, and I'm now, of course, blanking on the author's name, but it was written in modern slang, modern vernacular. But I was very lucky that my copy editor is of Icelandic descent, speaks Icelandic, and has been a huge resource. So big thank you to David John Fuller, who's helped me out. He invented with me a lot of the faux Icelandic words that are unique to Thunder Road. And we sort of settled on, when we wanted to make sure we were on the same page when discussing things, I just asked him what his favorite translation of the Edda was, and he typically works from Larrington's Poetic Edda. So naturally I had a copy of that. I've got like 3 shelves of Norse mythology books, but so that's if I have to specifically reference one, I usually use Larrington because then I'm on the same page as my copy editor.
Thank you so very much, Chadwick. If either yourself and or Dan have any closing comments you might like to offer, please do.
I'm so grateful that you all came out tonight, and to everybody watching the live stream. Thank you for taking time out of your evening, even if you couldn't be in the store or aren't in Winnipeg. It means a lot. Thanks.
Congratulations, Chadwick, with the book.
All right, so we will now move along to the signing portion of the evening. So we'll ask you all to remain in your place for just one moment while we transport Chadwick to the table beside our cash desk. We have copies of When the Sky Comes Looking for You on the table. We also have copies available at our cash desk. Please feel free to get a copy signed before you pay for it. Please do pay for the book. We are so incredibly grateful to Ravenstone/Turnstone again for helping put on this evening. To all of you for your questions, for your attention, for joining us here tonight, both locally and virtually as well. To Dan Vadeboncoeur for his hosting. Thank you so very much, Dan. And of course, to Chadwick for once again bringing us into the world of Thunder Road. Thank you all so much for coming. Have a wonderful night.